Man is indeed an industrious creature. He created the modern machine age by the cutting of metal and the manipulation of fire. Today's sleek jetliners are a symbol of modern civilization. This mass of intricately assembled parts frees itself from Earth's gravity and takes to the wide open skies. Has created a machine that can fly farther and faster than any bird. Ironically, however, this machine is not perfect because man made it. There is always the chance it will betray its maker. Japan. A jetliner bound from Sapporo in northern Japan abruptly vanished moments before it was due to land in Tokyo. It was the night of February 4th, 1966. The scheduled time of arrival at Tokyo International Airport was 19:02 hours. But the Boeing 727 never appeared. Hours later, floating objects were spotted in Tokyo Bay. Hope is lost for all 133 persons aboard. This was the start of a tragedy caused by the worst single airplane crash in history. The Boeing 727 crashed in Tokyo Bay, only 14 kilometers from Tokyo International Airport. In winter, Tokyo Bay is cold and rough. What went wrong with the Boeing 727 over the bay? The weather conditions were good. The sky was clear except for a few small clouds. There was no report of air turbulence. The cause of the disaster was shrouded in mystery. What happened up there? Was it loss of speed? An explosion? Engine failure? All told, 133 victims. They vanished in the cold winter sea. Why did these 133 have to die? What caused their death? An investigation was promptly begun to try and find the cause of this disaster. Mr. Juichi Narabayashi from the Civil Aviation Bureau, one of Japan's foremost experts in air disaster investigation. As in criminal investigation, air disaster investigation begins with an on-site inspection to obtain as many clues as possible. The landing flap apparently was not lowered, as indicated by the condition of this large bolt. Investigators arrive from the United States. Apparently, the wheels, too, were not down at the time of the disaster. The plane was not in landing position. The pilot's cabin is raised from the sea. Perhaps some clue may be obtained from the instruments. The fire extinguisher levers. These levers are activated should an engine catch fire. The number 3 engine extinguisher lever appears to have been pulled. This is perhaps an important clue. Did anything abnormal occur in the number 3 engine? The levers for the number 1 and number 2 engines both measure 172 millimeters in length. But the lever for the number 3 engine measures 184 millimeters. Did the pilot possibly activate the lever? The engine meter that was next recovered also showed that engine number 3 had an abnormally low power output. From the left, the engine power meters read 2.04 for engine number 1. 2.06 for engine number 2, but only 1.18 for engine number 3. The fire extinguisher lever and the engine meter both cast suspicion toward the number 3 engine. Awaiting the recovery of the tail section that carries the engines. Frogmen take photographs at a depth of 20 meters. The mud of the seabed is disturbed, obstructing the view. February 15th. The tail section carrying the engines is recovered. The number 1 engine is on the port side, the number 2 engine in the center, and the number 3 engine on the starboard side. The number 1 engine was still attached to the tail section. The number 2 engine left its air intake and had fallen away. There is no sign of the 3rd engine. A gaping hole appears as if the engine had been forcefully torn out. The mount, which fixes the engine to the fuselage. 2 bolts in front and 1 in the rear do the job. Investigator Narubayashi seems to be interested in the scratches on the engine mounts. The remains of the ill-fated plane return to Tokyo International Airport. The plane apparently disintegrated upon impact. The nose, fuselage, the wings, the tail assembly and engine sank separately to the bottom of the sea. 10 days have passed since the disaster. Most of the wreckage has been recovered and is stored in MacArthur Hangar at the airport. The center section has also been found. The controversial number 3 engine, which may hold the key to the mystery, is still missing. The number 3 engine must be found and examined. Other possible causes of the disaster could be fire or explosion inside the plane. Perhaps some structural defect or sudden loss of speed. Could the pilot have made an error? The Japanese government formed an investigating team consisting of well-known experts in the field. The head of the team is Professor Hidemasa Kimura. He has designed some of Japan's best planes. Take, for example, the YS-11 passenger plane, for which there is a potential market in the United States. Because of the seriousness of the Boeing 727 disaster, the foremost authorities have been called upon. Professor Yamana is an authority on structural dynamics. The position of a plane at the moment of impact can sometimes be determined from the way the broken metal pieces are twisted. It is assumed that the plane in question was flying almost horizontal to the water when it plunged into the sea. There are no signs that a fire or explosion occurred inside the plane. However, the lever of the rear door is open. Did someone open it? Someone who sensed something was going to happen shortly before the crash? The investigators divide into their respective fields to conduct separate probes. Rarely has a more critical eye been focused on a plane's design and structure. The Boeing 727, a medium-range jetliner, first went into service in February 1964. It is a very popular plane and is in service in many countries. Its 3 engines are located at the rear. For this reason, the tail assembly has a characteristic T-shape. The 3-fold flap is designed to increase the wing surface at takeoff and landing. Consequently, a Boeing 727 flying at Mach 0.87 at high altitude can decrease speed to that of an ordinary propeller-driven plane upon landing. Yet, in the first year and a half of service, there were 4 accidents involving a Boeing 727. In August 1965, a 727 plunged into Lake Michigan as it came in for a landing at Chicago. 3 months later, another 727 smashed into a hillside minutes before landing at Cincinnati. And 82 hours after this crash, a third 727 crashed and burned after touching down short of the runway at Salt Lake City. The Tokyo Bay crash was the 4th involving a Boeing 727. Moreover, all 4 occurred at night and shortly before landing. Speculation has been raised that because of the characteristic design of its flaps and T-shaped tail assembly, the 727 loses speed easily, sometimes fatally. The 727 is a highly efficient plane. Yet what was in it that betrayed the men who built her? On February 18th, the number 3 engine was found. Investigators rushed to the scene. The question in everyone's mind was, what clues may the number 3 engine hold? The mud-covered engine was slightly misshapen due to the force of the impact. There were no signs of an explosion. It was almost intact. But investigator Narabayashi was interested in one of the bolts with which the engine was mounted to the plane's body. The bolt was broken. It was the way the bolt was broken that interested the investigator. It is quite possible that this bolt broke due to metal fatigue while the plane was still in flight. Investigator Narabayashi thought not one moment should be lost. It was midnight, but he rushed from Tokyo to Professor Yamana's home 50 kilometers away in the suburbs of the city. The fact that the number 3 engine power meter showed a drop might suggest that the engine became unstable due to the broken bolt. If this is what happened, all companies with Boeing 727s in service throughout the world would have to be notified promptly. In Mr. Narabayashi's opinion, the topmost of the 3 bolts snapped due to metal fatigue. Then the next bolt broke, thereby causing the accident. If metal breaks from fatigue, a shell pattern is created. It is difficult to say whether there is a shell pattern on this bolt. A section of the suspicious bolt. This is the bolt that is believed to have broken next. The following day, the investigators assembled at MacArthur Hangar. Investigator Narabayashi's suspicions regarding the bolt stemmed from the scratches on the frame where the engine is mounted to the fuselage.
This この角度の合い方がこれとね、これだろうと思った。で、ちょっとここら辺りに来て、ここ来てるんじゃないかと。前向きにビューッとこう傷つけたと思う。これを合わせたいんです。これは。
His explanation. From the direction and angle of the scratches, one can determine how the engine moved when the bolt broke. In this instance, the topmost bolt broke due to fatigue. However, Mr. Nagano, a member of the investigating team specializing in metallurgy, felt that the bolt broke upon impact when the plane hit the water and not through metal fatigue. The bolt became the subject of a heated debate. A more detailed investigation was launched. As the investigation continues on the bolt, each piece of wreckage in MacArthur Hangar is given a number. The work of sorting goes on. One begins to wonder how many parts and components make up a jetliner. Each item is examined for flaws or any unusual characteristic. Long and unrewarding work is a basic requirement in accident investigation. From this countless number of broken pieces, will the one be found that will reveal the true story of the disaster? At the Metallic Materials Research Institute, the bolt from the number 3 engine is being put through a series of comparative tests. Tests are conducted with the bolt in question and with metal of the same composition. Both shock and fatigue are created artificially. A test where the bolt is stretched until it breaks. Another test to snap the bolt by the application of shock. Various cross-sections are studied. A shell pattern created by artificially inducing metal fatigue. The bolt in question, however, did not clearly show a shell pattern. According to this microscopic photograph, the pattern is more like one caused by the force of being suddenly pulled apart. The final conclusion of the metallurgists was that the bolt in question did not break from metal fatigue. The next step in the investigation was the dismantling of the number 3 engine at Ishikawajima Harima Industries in Tokyo. If there was nothing wrong with the bolt, why was the fire extinguisher lever activated? And why did the meter of the number 3 engine indicate such a low power output? Perhaps the engine itself was malfunctioning. First, the outer part of the engine is removed. The turbine appears. Anything unusual, even the slightest scratch, must not be disregarded. An engineer closely examines for scratches or marks on the cold metal. The blades overlap each other. Important evidence that the turbine was turning until shortly before the impact of the crash. There is even more important evidence. The engine sucked in broken pieces of machinery, an indication that the number 3 engine had enough power left to suck in objects at the time the front part of the plane broke up upon impact. The number 3 engine was functioning normally. The combustion chamber, the heart of the engine. There is nothing abnormal. All suspicions regarding the number 3 engine have now been cleared. It was not the guilty party. The mystery concerning the fire extinguisher lever and the engine meter was accidentally caused by the impact of the crash. Now the eye of suspicion turns to the Boeing 727's efficiency and to the pilot. Two months have passed since the disaster. Spring has come to Zojoji Temple, where the souls of the victims lie in eternal rest. Cherry trees are in full bloom. The investigators are trying to determine the condition of the Boeing 727 moments before it hit the water. The Boeing 727 passed the Tokyo range station at 18:56 hours. At 18:59, it was flying at an altitude of 10,000 feet over Chiba. 2 minutes later, the control tower at Tokyo International Airport lost radio contact with the pilot. The plane descended at a rate of 5,000 feet per minute. Perhaps this was too rapid. The investigators board a Boeing 727 to trace a course similar to the one taken by the disaster plane. If the ill-fated plane tried to descend too quickly and therefore lost speed, perhaps something unusual would happen to this plane too. A small television camera takes pictures of the gauges in the cockpit. The readings are videotaped for analysis. An investigator reads the instrument panel. The Tokyo range station is passed at 12,000 feet. The plane banks wide to the right in preparation for the descent. The plane begins to sink as the pilot grips the throttle. The aircraft descends at a rate of 5,000 feet per minute. The plane is rocked by small vibrations. The white caps of the bay are clearly visible.
Now over Najima.
A patrol boat stands at the ready at the crash site. Over the crash site, altitude 2,000 feet. The plane took the same course as the disaster jetliner and dropped 10,000 feet in 2 minutes. Nothing unusual was detected in the Boeing 727. A design intended to withstand the strains of an extremely rapid descent. An excellent aircraft. Ironically, one can say that the plane is almost unbelievably perfect. The pilot of the ill-fated plane was a 40-year-old veteran. The pilot's last entry in his log. Weak wind. Departing aboard JA 8302. He was a flyer since his youth. Very methodical, he didn't fail to paste the weather chart for the day in his logbook. It was inconceivable to those who knew him that he could make a careless mistake. The airline for which he worked had a long accident-free record. The pilot himself had only recently been given a company award for 5,000 consecutive hours without an incident. What moment of devilry could have visited this veteran pilot? Once again, we reconstruct the course taken by the disaster plane. February 4th. All Nippon Airways plane number 8302 takes off from Sapporo, the largest city in northern Japan. The passengers were visitors to the famous Sapporo Snow Festival. Takeoff, 17:55 hours. The plane flew above the clouds on jet route J35L. It approached Tokyo International Airport. The passengers were ready for landing. The sun had set and the moon was out. The sky and earth below presumably were blended in dark blue. The plane passed Tokyo Range Station and decreased altitude. Time, 18:56 hours. The plane contacted Tokyo Control.
8302 passing 11,000.
8302, roger. Maintain 10,000.
Tokyo 8302 cancel IFR, present time.
302, roger. Contact Tokyo Tower approaching Edogawa.
Roger. All Nippon Jet 8302 traffic. Conver 880 departed auto marker 30 seconds ago. Do you have aircraft inside, over?
At that moment, a Japan Airlines Convair
have aircraft
880
inside,
flying
over?
over Tokyo Bay to the Boeing's port side was entering its landing pattern. Was the pilot searching for the JAL plane during the 10 seconds before his answer came?
302, this time negative.
This was the last word from the disaster plane.
All Nippon Jet 8302, Tokyo Tower. How do you hear me, over? All Nippon Jet 8302, Tokyo Tower. How do you hear me, over? All Nippon Jet 8302, 8302, Tokyo Tower. How do you hear me, over? All Nippon Jet 8302, 8302, Tokyo Tower. How do you hear me, over?
Let's reconstruct the conditions at the time. Both the JAL Convair and the Boeing 727 were trying to land simultaneously. The pilot of the JAL plane reported that he had passed through some small clouds, which may have made visual sighting impossible. There's a jetliner close by, which you do not see. Your plane is losing altitude at a tremendous rate. It's evening, and you cannot see the ocean clearly. These conditions add up to a tremendous strain. Your plane hits the water. Investigator Ejima initiated an investigation on jet aircraft navigation. Using a photometer developed in Japan, he records the changes in light as a jet plane descends at dusk. A jet plane descending from high altitude at dusk plunges suddenly into darkness. It is quite conceivable that the pilot's eyes cannot always accustom themselves to this sudden change. There is a physiological limit in the reaction of the human eye to darker light.
では覗き窓に顔をつけてください。
Expose a man to bright light for 5 minutes, then switch suddenly to semi-darkness. He cannot see anything for a while. Only after a considerable time does he become accustomed to the dim light.
はい見えました。
It is possible that the high efficiency of jet aircraft is one up on the human eye, which has built-in limitations. Investigators board a plane to make a landing at dusk. The change in light outside the aircraft and on the instrument panel is recorded. Altitude, 22,000 feet. It's still light outside.
Outside, 8.6.
The descent begins. Altitude, 12,000 feet. It's still light, but night is approaching just below. It's dark blue and visibility is limited.
Outside, 6.5. Instrument, 4.6. Outside, 5.0.
Altitude,
Instrument,
7,000 feet. Altitude, 3,000 feet.
Outside, 4.5.
It's dark outside.
Instrument, 測定できず。
It took only 5 minutes to descend from daylight to complete darkness. Pilots know that it's difficult to make a landing at nightfall. Records show that many jet disasters occurred at nightfall even on fine days. There is a growing imbalance between the efficiency of a jet plane and man's navigational ability. The investigation, which began with twisted bits of metal, reached a point where the problem concerns the jet plane itself and man's physiological ability to pilot it. In the investigation of an air disaster, the why and how remain a mystery as long as decisive evidence is not found in the wreckage. Nobody saw how the pilot acted at that decisive instant when the plane plunged to its death. Scientists can suggest possible causes, but they cannot say for certain how a man who is no longer with us acted. At that moment, just prior to the crash, what did the pilot say to his machine? And what was the machine's response?
This time negative. 302, this time negative. 302, this time negative. 8302. Tokyo Tower, how do you hear me? Over. All Nippon Jet, 8302. Tokyo Tower, how do you hear me? Over.
The crash, which killed a total of 133 persons, poses a question regarding man's attitude as he tackles the challenges of the modern machine and electronic age. A machine which man cannot control can only destroy man. But only man has the capability to control and perfect that machine. Mankind continues to develop more complex machinery as his civilization becomes increasingly sophisticated. Question: is man sophisticated enough to withstand the confrontation between his own limitations and the super civilization he is creating?